In today's video, I'm going to show you how I got used to my serger and tried out a bunch of stitches on it. Now, this was my first serger that I ever had. It's the only serger I have. And when I first got it, the first things is there's a lot of controls. There's a lot of threads, needle, loopers. It's faster, it's louder, but I needed to become comfortable with it. So what I did was I took an old bed sheet and cut it up into squares. These are 6 inches by 6 inches, but for my sheet I did 5 inches by 8 inches. But my now go-to is 6 inches by 6 inches. Now what I did was I set up my machine correctly, threaded it. I have it set for a 3-thread overlock, which is a 1 needle and 2 threads. And what I do for standard practice whenever I come to my machine, I know it's set for stitch A, and it was sitting here, but on the Pro 5, these levers get bumped very easily. You can barely touch them and they move. So I always switch off to a different one and then back to the one I'm supposed to. And I'm at the setting that it's supposed to be for normal. I have normal stitch length, normal blade position, normal differential, and normal foot pressure. What I did was did a test stitch to make sure it looks right, compared it to the pictures in the book, and it looked correct on just about everything. Happy with it. This is what a normal serge will look like. Then what I did was there's a lot of different controls, and most of the time whenever you post on Facebook or ask questions, oh, my stitch doesn't look right, everybody's like, it's usually your loopers, thread them right, something. So I wanted to check and see what happens when I change my loopers. This is my upper looper, which is the one that goes over the front of the top when you're looking at it and sewing it. I went ahead and went all the way up on it. And did a serge. And this is what happens. And then I compared it to my normal. Now I have a good idea of what, if I have a serge seam that looks like this, and the lower looper is pulled to the front, it's your upper looper is too tight. And I did that the same, and I've switched it back to normal, and then I did the lower looper on high and found out that yes, it does pull it to the back. I did lower looper lowest, and it pulled it to the front. I did those for the loopers. I did it for the needle pressure also to see what happens. And for the needle, the biggest thing I found was if you do it too high, it's going to pull some of the looper threads in the wrong way. This is what a normal looks like. Let me show you if you turn your needle tension way too high. And they wouldn't have these controls on here to the settings that you could put maximum and lowers. You're not going to damage your machine if you threaded it correctly. looks okay on this side, but if you flip it over to the other side, if you put your needle pressure too high, this didn't seem to make much difference, but it'll pull these lower loopers into it, sometimes to the front, or sometimes pull the tops underneath to the back. On cotton, it doesn't really show up too much difference. But what I also did was, what does the stitch length do? This is at normal, so I did some at a much lower, like 1.5. Now I have a stitch that I look at 1.5, and I compare it to my original. That's the stitch length. As you can see, it makes it much more denser. Then I also went up and did a test at almost 4 to see what that looks like. And a warning, when you go up on your stitch length, your fabric flies through the machine a lot quicker. And that's what a larger stitch length looks like. It spaces them out quite a bit more. It doesn't look as attractive as that. And I also tried out the presser foot differences here, maximum and lower. I did the differential, which changes the feeding of the dogs, which helps with more knit fabric than cotton fabric. Then I did a bunch of tests on moving the cutting blade to its widest and to its narrowest. Now there's always a little misconception about the knife and what it cuts. It really doesn't change the width of your stitch. Everybody thinks, oh, if I go narrower, it'll make it narrower. No. What it does is, if your thread isn't right on the edge where it's supposed to be, and you see a gap here, okay, that means you need to move the knife either a little closer, or if it's pulled it in a little bit and scrunched it up like this, move your knife blade out a little bit. Let me do one with the blade all the way in so I could show you that it's... I still had the stitch length at 4. I don't know if you could see it, but see how the thread is now past and loops out into outer space here? There's a space between the raw edge of the fabric and the needle thread, versus this is spot on right with it, where this is got loops. That means you need to add more fabric in here or make this blade cut a little farther over here. But if you go too far, what it does is this pulled in, I put the blade all the way over. See, it didn't change the width of the thing, the stitch. What it did was, it now pulled this in a little bit and made it not flat. See how it's kind of curling a little bit versus if you have it up correctly, your fabric lays flat underneath all of the stitching. So if your fabric is warping a little this way under the stitches, pull the blade back a little bit toward the normal. And that's how I got used to using my serger. And I literally tried probably for a whole bed sheet, probably 4.5 hours. I nearly used up entire spools of thread, and I literally had a whole bucket full of stitches left over. But what it did was it gave me a good understanding of what the controls do. And then what I did was I not only did this particular stitch, I did most of the stitches that I would be using and tried out a bunch of different settings on those also. And this made me incredibly more comfortable with my machine. And I recommend that get an old bed sheet, go through here, switch these switches up, and see what happens. And it'll just give you a better understanding of what a good stitch looks like and what, if it looks bad, what might be the thing that'll fix it. And you'll be much more comfortable with your machine.